Bankless Nation, welcome to this edition of Alpha Leak. Alpha Leak is the episode where we go and find a project in crypto that people are excited about. And today we are talking to the team members behind Velodrome. We're going to get into Velodrome, what it is, in just a hot second. But here we have Gabagool, otherwise known as Gaba. He does BD stuff, business development. We also have Alex Cutler, who's doing comms and operations. We got Tao, who's coming in on the tokenomics and strategy side of things. And we also got Jack, also doing strategy and also business development. These are some of the members of the Velodrome DAO of sorts. We're going to figure out how Velodrome is organized behind the scenes. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, all. Thank you.
Cheers. All right, let's go ahead and get right into it and just start with the obvious question. What is Velodrome?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that to this Tao. So Velodrome, in essence, is an automated market maker, which offers low slippage swaps on the Optimism network. And to offer low slippage, Velodrome incentivizes liquidity in a very similar way as Curve does on ETH mainnet, which means Velodrome basically emits tokens, the Velo token, on a weekly basis, where the holders of VeVelo, which is the locked version of the token, can vote on which pairs to direct emissions to. So kind of like to take a little bit of a step back, when you think of Curve, you can grab the Curve token, CRV, the same way that you can grab or acquire the Velo token, then lock it for a period of time, up to 4 years maximum. The longer that you lock it, which means you kind of give away liquidity of the token, the longer that you lock it, the more vote power you have. Also, of course, depending on the balance of how many tokens you lock. And with that vote power, then you can decide as a VeVelo holder where emissions should go in terms of the token pairs that are being offered on the marketplace. And it is a permissionless marketplace where people can propose new tokens to be whitelisted. And once token is whitelisted on the marketplace, anybody can create a pool with those tokens or any combinations of the tokens, and also create a gauge on which emissions can be voted and distributed to incentivize liquidity. And liquidity joins the marketplace, and you offer very good slippage on swaps. Especially, we have stable pairs and volatile pairs with different formulas that also add some efficiency to the swaps. And if anybody was familiar with Solidly on Phantom, Velodrome is actually designed based on Solidly's model, which was kind of launched by Andre Cognier, a famous developer. Most people should probably know about him. But Solidly had some troubles once it was launched. We, as a team, were part of DAO, which basically was a farming as a service protocol, sort of like a protocol that allowed anybody, any retail holder, to play the Solidly wars. But we were sort of like a team strategizing on how to follow the best strategy to use the mechanics on Solidly to acquire vote power, direct emissions, increase the vote power, and basically maximize the value driven back to holders of DAO token, which I'm sure we can speak about a little bit more of the history. But I mean, this is the essence of Velodrome. It's an automated market maker that is very efficient, offers very low slippage, and has been driving a lot of TVL, or acquiring a lot of TVL on Optimism. Last I checked, I think we're at $15.5 million of TVL, which is pretty decent for these markets.
Yeah, Andre, when he launched Solidly, which, as Tao mentioned, is what Velodrome is based off of, he described it as a next generation AMM, because in many ways it draws from sort of the best elements of Curve, the best elements of sort of Convex, the best elements of Uni v3, and takes sort of all the lessons that have been sort of learned over the years about what works really well in those models and what doesn't, sort of tries to bring them together in a single protocol. And I think the one other thing I would add is a protocol designed to be an ecosystem public good, right? very much a protocol's protocol that incentivizes active liquidity versus passive, where 100% of bribes, 100% of fees go back to the voters versus sort of going to those LPs. And so, yeah, Velodrome is our take on that next generation AMM and bring it into an ecosystem that is actively growing in the form of Optimism.
Yeah, so let me repeat back to you guys what I heard just to check my understanding. It's the idea is that the curve wars are a success, as in the curve wars do the job that they are intended to do, which is maintain decentralization of curve while also inducing liquidity. Curve as an AMM is also a success. And so like it does a good job of actually providing liquidity. Where it's not a success is it is kind of confined to just like kind assets. And it doesn't have to be that way. There is like, you can take the curve model and apply it to volatile pairs, where Uniswap v3 has really had that success with the concentrated the concentrated liquidity model. And so from what I'm gathering, Velodrome is taking the Curve Wars token issuance model, is taking the Curve AMM structure, but adding in Uniswap v3 concentrated liquidity to also create and also enable volatile non-like kind pair liquidity. And it's also built on top of the Optimism v2. Is all of these parts, these are all the components, the relevant components that make up Velodrome?
Yeah, the only note is that we don't have Uni v3 functionality. We don't have the concentrated liquidity. So the volatile model that we're using is Uni v2. But you're correct in that it's a Uni v2 model slotted into the like VE token sort of structure and emissions and bribes and all those sorts of things that are familiar from the curve model.
Can we talk about, let's unpack that a little bit, because I've always kind of thought like Uniswap v2, the basic AMM curve, it got iterated on in Uniswap v3 because it was capitally inefficient. Like capital efficiency in v3 is kind of the whole thing. What are the benefits of using the curve structure? And maybe we could also, for just the beginner listeners out there, if somebody could explain the difference between curves like pricing algorithm versus Uniswap. Like Uniswap v2, it's x times y equals k. It's this very smooth curve. Curve's algorithm is a little bit different. Can you talk about just some basic AMM design structures, how curve is different from Uniswap, and then how you guys iterate on curve?
Well, one thing I'll say is that I think the Uniswap v3 model really is like the gold standard in terms of efficient concentrated liquidity, but it's not very accessible for retail liquidity providers. We've seen a lot of data that shows that your average LP on Uni v3 is losing money. And that has certainly not been the case for the Uni v2 model.
Everybody's been losing money in this market, brother.
That is certainly true. But yeah, with Uni v3, it's really I think it's more for your more sophisticated market makers, for your larger LPs. And our model is a bit more retail friendly. And Jack or Tao might be able to comment further on the price curves.
Yeah, I would add, if you think about kind of like if you're a protocol and you want to have liquidity for your token, on Uni v3, you sort of depend on all the players to go ahead and kind of be strategic about it and provide that concentrated liquidity that Uni v3 does provide, which kind of does help some of the players. But if you actually want to incentivize your token liquidity before it actually captures the attention of liquidity providers, you can actually come on Velodrome and acquire Velo, lock it, and then start voting on your pool, and you'll get that TVL automatically because people will farm it to get the Velo tokens, or you can bribe that pool. So it's a way for any protocol to very quickly acquire liquidity or accumulate liquidity on an AMM by actually having a very capital efficient, like a couple of tools that can be very capital efficient for them to do so. So if you acquire Velo and lock it, you continue to hold your position as you incentivize the pool, and also you receive the fees back for your own pool. So you're sort of, you can actually increase the value of your position over time while getting liquidity for your token. So on the mechanics, it actually helps protocols build that liquidity very quickly. On the swaps themselves, the stable swaps, as you say, we use a very different formula. The actual formula, I think it's x squared y plus y squared x equals the invariant constants that are tied to each of the pools. But the simple way of thinking about it is when you have stable swaps, you basically have the balances of two tokens. And what the pool does is that it allows one of the tokens to be majorly imbalanced in a stable pool without changing the price too much. And this, of course, works with stables because stables should have other mechanisms other than pools to hold the peg. If they don't, they don't work well as stable or as a stable pair. So the pool itself doesn't worry too much about the imbalance. Basically, allows a bit more imbalance. In essence, if a stable coin is really collapsing, eventually it does come to a point where it falls very quickly, right? Once it gets to a point where the balance is so high that it's very clear that the peg is being lost, then you see very radical price movements. But while that doesn't happen, the price stays very, very stable because the pool allows that. Whereas the typical or the Uni V2 price curve actually is very reactive to movements, imbalances on the pool. So having that flexibility and that difference between the types of swaps does allow for greater efficiency on both sides.
Would I be correct in saying that the Velodrome strategy is to optimize for ease of liquidity providing, and that liquidity providing in Uniswap v3 is super complicated because you actually have to take an opinion as to the direction of the market, and most retail investors just want to lazy LP. So is the strategy of Velodrome to kind of have the best of both worlds of concentrated-ish concentrated-ish liquidity using a curve model, a manipulated curve model, but also the lazy LPing that was so awesome to have in Uniswap v2? Is that the things we're trying to combine here?
Yeah, and I'd add one additional layer on top of that, which is because Velodrome is very much designed for protocols, it's also about where the value sort of accrues. So certainly there needs to be enough rewards and incentives to attract LPs. And so the only rewards that LPs get on Velodrome is emissions of the Velo token. And those emissions are, of course, chosen by VE Velo voters. But just as an example, the OP token right now, the two primary on-chain sort of sources of liquidity are Velodrome in the form of a Velo USDC pair, and on Uni v3 in the form of ETH OP. The token pair on Velodrome is producing hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees that go back to VE Velo voters. And who is the primary voter? The Optimism Foundation, right? So their liquidity that they have attracted through Velodrome is producing them revenue. And on Uniswap, who's earning that revenue? The LPs. It's not a profitable activity for Optimism. In fact, they have a deal with a market maker to sort of ensure that liquidity is there. And in some ways, they're paying for it. So I think what you're describing, David, is exactly right in that the dynamics for LPs are a little bit different. But I think in the end, it's about protocols having the ability to attract liquidity in a way that is actually revenue positive for them without them having to sort of use their own token to do so, or to pay somebody else to do so. All that value sort of flows back to them. All flows back to the voters.
Yeah, Alex, let's go into that a little bit more, because I'm starting to see some alignment with the whole optimism ethos of public goods funding. And can you continue that conversation there? How is the Velodrome model just more conducive to integrations and other protocols around optimism, and also optimism itself?
Yeah, Jack, maybe do you want to jump in there a little bit?
Yeah, I think the main focus that we have is, as we've mentioned, to be a public good. What does that mean? It means that the work that we do helps the ecosystem thrive. In our case, we mentioned that Optimism is a fairly large stakeholder in Velodrome, which means that they have a lot of power over where emissions are directed. So let's take this from the perspective of a new protocol that wants to launch on Optimism. I don't have a lot of money because nobody has a lot of money in this type of climate. But what I do have are some good partnerships with the foundation. I'm getting a grant from governance, and I'm getting probably some Optimism tokens sent over to me directly from them, right? So what I can do is through us, and really not anywhere else on on Optimism currently, we can start to do one of two things. Either A, start to buy up some of our tokens, start to buy up some Velo tokens and lock them so that we can vote for our new protocol's native pool paired against ETH or USDC, thereby providing liquidity for my token. Or I can bribe some V lockers to direct emissions to that pool. What's happened here is that without soliciting VC, without trying to raise substantial sums of money, I'm able to do the one thing that every protocol has to do when they're getting started, and that's to get liquidity for whatever operations they have or for their own basic token if they have. That's the basic premise. There's a lot that's going to, I think, flow from that premise, but foundationally, the idea is that we say that we're an AMM, but we're also a liquidity marketplace. And in the context of an ecosystem, that means that we are the clearinghouse of the kind of the foundational activity that occurs in DeFi on Optimism.
Yeah, Andre described it as he designed the incentives of Solidly to align everyone's incentives such that voting for the pools that are most important to the ecosystem is the most incentivized behavior, right? And that by virtue of that, if a new protocol wants to be sort of onboarded to the Optimism ecosystem, as Jack said, they have to bootstrap their own liquidity. It is very much in the interest of folks like us as a team, the Velodrome team, right, to vote for emissions to those pools when they join. Likewise, as Optimism, being able to control a ton of sort of the voting power and emissions allows them to say, hey, new protocol looking to get started. We don't have to spend any money in order to sort of get you onboarded. You might not even need to spend any money. Like, you just need emissions, whitelisted pool, emissions directed to them. We will vote for it. That doesn't have to be purely altruistic. We also get all the fees by virtue of having, voted for your initial liquidity. And then that sort of protocol, like Jack said, through bribes, through farming, through their protocol and liquidity, through locking, is able to sort of build that initial foundation. And that's how you get this like virtuous cycle in the ecosystem and the kind of growth that, of course, every L2 and Optimism in particular is so focused on right now.
Right, and this just fits in right into Optimism's retroactive public goods mechanism, where generalized activity on Optimism kind of flows into block-based demand, which flows into funding for further projects, right? And so now there's this other part of Optimism, which is this Velodrome mechanism, this gadget that can kind of has a brain and can put liquidity into places that it needs to put liquidity at that specific moment in time. And then Optimism, the layer 2, and the governance over Optimism has this ability to think about like, all right, like what's the best, where should we point this liquidity in this particular moment in time to help this thing get bootstrapped? And maybe this thing that we're bootstrapping is also this thing that we are also funding with retroactive public goods to help that thing get started. And that's just like, elementary school. And then once it graduates through elementary school, then it can go on through its way. And then and then it becomes part of the self-sustaining part of Optimism. Is that kind of the vision that you guys share here?
Yeah, 100%. I think a good example of this. So first of all, Velodrome is an entirely bootstrapped project. We'll get into like the exact story, but one of our, Optimism gave us a $150,000 grant, which we used to fund front end and back end development of Velodrome. It's quite a small amount of money compared to how much a new DeFi protocol will often raise. And so what did we provide in return for that capital? We said we will work with any project that you want to come over to Optimism, and we will, if they're open to it, partner with them, provide them a initial airdrop of vote locked Velo, and help kind of usher this project onto Optimism. A good example of kind of how we executed these partnerships is Synthetics has all of these kind of baby Synthetics projects built on top of Synthetics. So Lyra, Thales, Quenta, Aelin. And we went to all of these projects and said, what do you need? What are your liquidity needs? And really the big answer was there's not sufficient SUSD liquidity on Optimism. It's getting there, but it's not there yet. So we've ended up working with Lyra very closely, Thales, Synthetics, to help bolster SUSD liquidity and to bring more liquidity for their native tokens. And we've seen these protocols bribing in our ecosystem, and also directing emissions and managing their own VNFT positions.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting example, because they all want to take on TradFi, right? They want big dollars, feeding things like options trading, perpetuals, all these sort of different financial mechanisms. And as Gava said, they said number one barrier to us sort of achieving that vision is deep liquidity on synthetic pairs, SUSD, USDC being one of the most important. So how have they been getting that traditionally? They've accumulated, some amount of curve. They've been bribing via convex, directing some emissions to those pools. And, on curve, they've got, a few $million in there. But what is that generating for the ecosystem? Not much. I mean, they are basically paying to attract that liquidity. As a voter, they might earn a portion of those fees, but on curve, 50% of the fees go to LPs. 50% go to the voters. On Velodrome, we are massively boosting sort of the liquidity on SUSD. And rather than each of those ecosystem partners needing to pay for that liquidity is actually paying them. So if you imagine, millions and millions of dollars of volume flowing through those SUSD pools, it's no longer just like an investment those protocols need to make in order to basically fund their growth. That growth is going to become a revenue stream for them because 100% of the fees that those pools gather goes right back to them. So it is the ultimate kind of win-win model. And, I think this is why, Andre had this idea. He distributed 100% of ownership initially of Solidly to the protocols on Phantom. We tempered that a little bit because we think that had some unintended consequences, but the idea is the same, right? The protocols should own it. The protocol should earn all the fees, all the bribes, because ultimately this is base layer infrastructure for the ecosystem. It's not to make us money, it's not to sort of serve our investors or VCs. It's for the ecosystem.
And to put a finer point on it, for the Optimism Collective as well, it really shouldn't be overlooked that they are collecting massive fees from this, which gives them more capacity to fund public goods and potentially, more of a justification for or an answer to questions about how this ecosystem intends to generate value.
So just to clarify, as an LP, I don't collect any fees?
That's
you do
correct.
not collect trading fees. You are rewarded by Velo emissions, which are directed to you from the voters.
Right. Okay. And so the Velo token collects the fees, and as an LP, I collect the Velo token.
Correct. You
Vote
have
lock
to lock
Velo.
it. Yeah.
If you lock it. Okay. So the Velodrome as the AMM, it does collect fees. It puts it into the Velo token, but only if you lock the token. As an LP, I receive the Velo token, but I only get more Velo tokens if I lock the token. And so the idea here is that it forces alignment between the Velodrome project, the Velodrome protocol, and like all the applications on Velodrome. This also starts to feel a little bit like tokamak, where like you get to have the token, you get to like direct liquidity around the space. It's an interesting model just to not give any fees to the LPs. And maybe this is a question like, I would imagine maybe the biggest stablecoin providers in Curve, LP providers in Curve, perhaps might also be CRV owners as well. I'm guessing that is true. I don't know if that's any truth in fact, but I think you guys are just like skipping forward in this like logical conclusion of just like, well, no, if like we can just force more alignment with the protocol itself by putting all of the fees into the protocol and also force you to lock up your Velo tokens. Can you guys just check my thinking on this and just like elaborate on the decision here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. We're basically centralizing or focalizing all the value that drives or that flows through the protocol on the Velo token. So the fact that fees go to VE Velo token holders or vote locked token holders makes or creates value for Velo liquid token itself, because now you have an extra incentive to acquire it and lock it, especially if you're a protocol. So by focalizing the value on Velo, you also deliver greater value to LPs, because LPs will receive this token that in essence can also have fees flowing back to it once it's locked. Another thing that we haven't touched on is that it has an element of the 3-3 model that Olympus DAO initially introduced, in that VE or vote locked Velo tokens get an epoch rebate. So every week they get a slight rebate that controls for dilution. So LPs are receiving tokens, but VE Velo is also increasing its balance. So that allows for emissions to be, or basically to be emitted into perpetuity. And in fact, the emission schedule will basically run forever until, as long as the blockchain exists, the emissions will continue to run on Velodrome. So that allows the incentives for LPs to always be there without diluting voters too much, or at least controlling for dilution. And that dilution also, or that rebase also, is based on the percentage of total supply that is locked.
Yeah, I was going to say that the one other consideration that's important I want to be sure to hit is the fees aren't equally distributed amongst voters. The fees, 100% of the fees go to the voters who actually voted for that specific pool, and bribes as well go to the folks who voted for those pools. So ideally that should, to your point, David, align the incentives fully to direct it to basically the highest fee, the most efficient sort of pools on the network.
Okay, so you as a VE token holder, you are most incentivized to direct emissions towards the pools that collect the highest fees?
Correct, yeah.
How do you square that with like, okay, there's this brand new protocol that needs to be bootstrapped, and by proxy of that, it's therefore not getting very many fees because it's brand new. Why would somebody vote for that brand new protocol then, if there's not much fee volume there?
I think that's where bribing really comes in, and we're just starting to see the beginning of a bribing economy emerge on Velodrome. We never really saw it properly with Solidly because there were fundamental errors, flaws in the bribing architecture. But for a emergent protocol, it probably would be cheaper to bribe a pool to bootstrap liquidity at the start than it would be to purchase an amount of vote locked Velo to bootstrap a certain amount of liquidity. Of course, those numbers are variable. It depends on the price of Velo, it depends on the price of the native token. But fundamentally, that is how the protocol is intended to work, that there's a balance between basically the cost of liquidity from bribing and the cost of liquidity from directing emissions.
Yeah, and likewise, why somebody like Optimism having a large portion of the voting control, having interests outside of just collecting fees. Likewise with us, we plan to maintain some degree of an ecosystem position, right? That we can sort of direct votes to help new protocols bootstrap. So there will always be an element of that, but between bribes, between those sort of like ecosystem actors, it should basically make it very easy to incentivize liquidity for new projects entering, knowing that more projects, more velocity, these are all net positive things for Velodrome and for Optimism broadly.
So you guys mentioned that you got a $150,000 grant from Optimism to get started. Is that all of your funding, or how is this thing like self-sustainable? How are you guys putting food on the table here?
Yeah, well, so I think it's important to go back to the beginning of the project with VDAO on Solidly. I'm the founder of a DAO called Information Token. Information Token is a investing, research, and incubation DAO. We do early stage venture, we incubate projects, and we do some consulting work. And so Jack, Tao, and myself are all members of Information Token. And Information Token incubated VDAO. VDAO is this farming as a service project that launched with a high emissions yield farm to capture enough TVL to receive a Solidly NFT. I think at our peak, we had $2.5 billion worth of TVL on Phantom in VDAO farms. And so throughout that process, we learned a lot about vote escrow tokenomics. We studied Solidly very closely. And when we kind of saw the writing on the wall with how the flaws in Solidly were, having implications on the market, we started talking to Optimism, and they were quite interested in having another source of liquidity aside from Uniswap on Optimism. And so they agreed to bootstrap the funding of Velodrome with that $150,000 grant. We also have given ourselves a small percentage of emissions. Alex might be able to talk more specifically about that. But really, this is a team. It's we're decentralized. We are funded entirely from that grant, and then from some leftover funds that were in the VDAO treasury that just today actually will end up receiving. I think all the people involved in building this project are, I don't want to say it's like entirely altruistic. We have upside. If Velodrome succeeds, we stand to make more money. But we're really kind of in DeFi to experiment on the bleeding edges of a new technology. And that's really the ethos that at least we came into this project with from kind of this DAO that we're all a part of.
So how is the DAO structured? Can we take a peek inside? I'm assuming it's a Discord. How many people are in there? And how many actual value contributors? And I know there's a loose lines between who's officially on the team and who's just a DAO member. But overall, can you guys just characterize the workforce behind Velodrome?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So. As Gaba mentioned, right, we started as VDAO, right, and VDAO's initial purpose, right, was totally around maximizing sort of control of Solidly. But as soon as we realized that experiment wasn't going to work, and we sort of shifted our focus to incubating Velodrome, we basically had a ton of different people who sort of came into the VDAO community that we used sort of the Weave token, which was our DAO token at the time, to sort of help incentivize participation. And I would say that the group that contributed to the incubation of Velodrome was probably maybe around like 30, 35 folks. Some, of course, very much sort of full time. I think everybody on this call was pretty solely devoted to it. Other folks, were more folks who just sort of dropped in or dropped out, had a certain set of skill sets, making videos, making content, contributing to strategy. But when we were sort of deciding how we would structure Velodrome, having gone through a really tumultuous sort of DAO experience, I think we decided that initially we did not want Velodrome to be a DAO. So governance is obviously very important to the product itself, in the sense that in the end it's Velo lockers that control emissions. But we as a team are sort of in the process of figuring out what our new structure will be. So most of those 35 folks are, of course, still engaged, right? And our Discord is very live and rich. And right now we're just sort of figuring out, especially on a shoestring, basically how do we bootstrap, about 6 months of pretty focused effort. We've got a lot that we still want to do for the product. We have a lot of folks we want to, of course, ensure are taken care of, so they can put that time of energy into it. But it remains, I think, the sort of spirit of a DAO, very egalitarian, very little structure, very just transparent, very much like raise your hand if you want to chip in. And if you're, going on a trip, going to NYC, New York, and got to bounce for a little bit, it's okay. Somebody else will pop in. And, we're just doing our best to sort of reward those ongoing contributions with that little bit of money that we've got left over from the initial bootstrap, as well as, of course, some of that Velo that was allocated to team and a share of those ongoing emissions. But the cool thing as well, we talked about the whole idea of this protocol is that by virtue of voting for pairs, you generate sort of revenue. We have this large ecosystem fund, and by virtue of sort of using that ecosystem to vote for sort of key pairs and boost key pairs, we now have revenue streams as well. I think voting for DAI USDC over this last week equaled basically enough revenue in both DAI and USDC from the trading fees to represent about a 150% APR, right? So by virtue of us voting and helping to grow the TVL and Optimism, we are also, of course, starting to generate just a little bit of that fee revenue, which will eventually, I think, support a very autonomous protocol that doesn't require a team, probably just requires a few people keeping the lights on, that kind of thing. So I think that's where we want to be in 6 months, is that there really isn't much of a team anymore. Probably still a few folks in the community doing support, all of that sort of stuff. But, I think we're big decentralization people. So the hope is eventually, Velodrome's just a machine that's running.
Yeah, that is the DAO model, right? That's actually pretty unique to see in the space where you guys plan on, or at least intend to, taking off the hands as much as possible within 6 months. That's pretty crazy. Most DAOs kind of well, you guys are going to get bigger, not smaller, aren't you? It's unique to hear about a DAO that actually is getting smaller. Let's go into the roadmap for this. What's it going to take to get to that point? What are you guys working on right now? What are you guys going to be working on tomorrow? And what's just the long-term vision for this whole thing?
Yeah. So I'll speak a little bit to that. I think we have several key focus right now, areas of focus. We have making sure that the product that we shipped is functioning at its highest level. So fixing any remaining front end bugs, making sure that all of our contracts are functioning properly so that people can vote, bribe, and provide liquidity seamlessly. And that will probably be an ongoing effort, but also we that's what we have our devs on right now. We have pretty significant biz dev efforts that are ongoing. So talking with protocols who are either planning on deploying to Optimism or in the process of deploying. For instance, Alchemix is a partner of ours. Alchemix is not fully deployed to Optimism, but they are they are coming. And as Optimism acquires more of these kind of what I would call as mainnet primitives that allow people to, really use that full suite of DeFi 1.0 tools, I think that Optimism will be a more lively and sustainable environment for DeFi. And then, we're also continually trying to improve the analytics tools that we're providing to retail investors in Velodrome. So had a call yesterday with APY Vision about using some of their suite of analytics tools to help investors understand the various kind of APY that are available weekly on our pools. And Alex can probably expand on all that.
Yeah, well, actually, Jack, do you want to sort of set up Relay? So we have this sort of vision for what you might even call like 2.0 that we're calling Relay.
Yeah. So at the start of this, we talked about how Velodrome was combining some of the best elements of Curve, of Uniswap, and so on, and Convex. We're now going to integrate what's best of the rest of that Curve stack. So now we're talking about the Vodium, Llama Union elements. What we're going to be doing is focusing on improving the quality of life for vote lockers. Specifically, what we'll be doing is allowing, I think, two major things. One is to provide automatic delegation of votes. So if I'm a vote locker, currently I have to vote every week in order to be able to claim bribes or potentially change my votes based on fees. And that can be a pretty time-consuming thing, especially if I'm a protocol or if I'm somebody who's trying to profit maximize. Currently, Vodium offers this option for lockers who want to profit maximize. That's going to be an option that we offer. There
so
also
it's like
might
a
be
urine strategy for voting, basically.
exactly built-in farming, right? And however, there are some I think potential. There's some interesting design space here where you can theoretically delegate your votes not necessarily to what's profit maximizing, but what might be best for the ecosystem, right? I mean, you could be a vote locker and say, okay, I'll give all my votes to another participant, maybe like Optimism. So now I'm delegating my votes to whoever Optimism wants to do. I collect the fees from that, I collect the bribes for that. And it becomes a really nice type of flywheel. So that's one thing. We're integrating that part. The other part will be auto compounding, which now becomes a really interesting flywheel because it's a way to keep basically any of the value generated by the protocol inside the protocol. One thing that we observed with Curve and the Convex and all the Curve wars was that there are a couple I think there are a couple key weaknesses of that model. Three specifically. I mean, one is that you have competing interests. You have people trying to jockey for control over this protocol, and you have a 2-token model, or multiple token models as a result of this type of like stratified jockeying. What we're doing is we're using only one token that does all of the things. That way, when you're trying to compound control, there isn't, kind of a major question of where you ought to go. Finally, what the biggest quality of life is, now we have a completely integrated ecosystem for liquidity inside a single UI. I am not going from one website to another, trying to figure out, should I be, on Curve, should I be trying to acquire on Convex? Am I going to be buying into Frax or whatever else, right? In order to be able to participate in this, there is one place to do all of it, and so I think this to me seems like the fullest realization of what liquidity ought to look like in a strictly permissionless context.
Yeah, UI and UX isn't the maybe most valued attribute in the DeFi space, but there are people who just want to say, like, I believe in DeFi, I believe in Optimism, I want to participate, and I want that to show up in the form of some additional cash or income, right? And I'm a big fan of Curve and Convex and Vodium and Llama Air Force, but my gosh, did it take a long time to figure all of that out. And David, y'all's podcast on Curve, I remember just being one of the best ones because it really broke it down for me. I mean, just imagine if that was all sort of 1 or 2 clicks within a single sort of product, and that all the layers of additional people taking a cut along the way are not there anymore. Convex, it's something like 17%. Llama Air Force, I think it's a deal, of course, but they're taking percentages on it. It's sort of spread out amongst so many folks, whereas you can keep probably those fees much lower, keep the value accrual within Vela, within the single token, and make for a great user experience. And so I think that's where we want to go, right? We have the benefit of building all these pieces kind of as one, whereas all of this sort of innovation happened independently. And we can learn from the best of it and build it right in, hopefully.
Plus low fees on the layer 2, of course. So you get that as well. Guys, is there any stone that we haven't left unturned? Is there any aspect I haven't asked about yet?
Boy.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Optimism. It's really been a pleasure working with the team. I think that it's rare to find people who, from like the foundation level are so involved in supporting the ethos of decentralization and really pushing this space to, fund public goods, et cetera, with the capital that they have and with their token. So there really wouldn't be a Velodrome without that grant from Optimism, and I just feel a lot of gratitude for the team, what they've done for us, and what we've been able to accomplish working with them.
Awesome, guys. Well, where can people go join Velodrome DAO, go help contribute, or just go find out more?
Yeah. Check out our website, velodrome.finance. That's sort of the main AMM on the landing page there. Of course, you can find links to our Discord, our Twitter. We would, of course, love folks to come join the community, the conversation, follow us as we sort of grow and expand, and hopefully, talking about OP summer or L222, I think we're all buckling down for a rough year, but I think this will be the sunniest part of crypto and DeFi. And so, if you haven't already come over, experience those fast transactions, those low fees, those great APRs on stable LPs, what are you waiting for? Come on over. It's airdrop summer, right, on Optimism.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for explaining all about Velodrome to me. I feel very well informed, and so I think I shall go and do that. All right, Bankless Nation, thank you for tuning in to this Alpha Leak edition of Velodrome. As always, of course, crypto is risky, DeFi is risky, stuff on layer 2s are risky. You can lose what you put in. We are headed west, however. This is the frontier. It's not for everyone, but we are glad you are with us on the Bankless journey. Thanks a lot. Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.